Welcome to my sixth podcast. As you can see, the budget for this juggernaut continues to increase. You can see that I'm now using a digital kind of a screen capture situation, thanks to one of my ex-students and professional astrologer. So you can see I'm using OneNote here, and hopefully that'll mean things are a bit clearer and a bit smoother, and it'll be in landscape, which will be handy because I know that there've just been a barrage of complaints over my portrait orientation when I was had my setup with my iPhone. So point taken. So this podcast is going to be on some paradoxes in special relativity. So first of all, I just want to say that this is not something that is testable or examinable by VCAR. It's more because it's interesting, but also I think getting a bit of grip on these paradoxes helps your overall understanding of how relativity works. So I think it's conducive to being able to perform better, but the essence of it is not something that you would be tested on. So just in case you're unsure, a paradox is like a contradiction. So when we have two statements that seem to completely disagree. So you've already seen that special relativity is very weird. There are some counterintuitive results coming out of it, but in particular we're going to look at a couple of ideas where it seems like it says two completely contradictory things at once, and we want to look at how we make sense of that, how we resolve that. So that's the goal, just introducing these two confusing paradoxes. A quick reminder of what we mean when we talk about length contraction. So length contraction is referring to when we take a measurement between 2 points, such as between the ends of a train or something, and when we take a measurement between 2 points in a frame where those points are not moving, then we call that the proper length. And if we take a measurement of those 2 points, or the distance between those 2 points in any other frame, we will find that that measurement is smaller, hence length contraction. And also just to point out or remind you that that contraction will always be parallel to the direction of motion. So it's only kind of squashing, if you like, in a certain dimension, not all dimensions. So to introduce this paradox, let's just return to our trusty situation with a train and a platform. And in this situation, I am going to be saying that they're in the same reference frame to begin with. So let's just imagine that the train is not moving relative to the platform. And so in that case, when it's not moving relative to the platform, they both agree that the end of the... Well, you can see that I'm still trying to learn how to actually use OneNote here. I didn't mean for that to be so ridiculously huge. Let's go with a blue knot highlighter. See if that works any better. There we go. Okay, so if reference frames were to take a measurement from one end to the other of their respective pieces of infrastructure, they would come up with the same result. In other words, the end of the train is in line with the end of the platform at both ends, so the left end and the right end, and they agree on that, and they would say that both have this measurement for length L0, which is our proper length. So basically what I'm trying to say is these two things have the same length in the sense that you would be used to in your everyday life. Now we move on to the situation where we say the train is moving relative to the platform. So we've moved into the reference frame of the platform. And as you saw in our length contraction episode, therefore the person on the platform, we're still in their reference frame. So they still say that the platform has a length L0. That hasn't changed for them. But because the train is moving relative to them, they say the train is no longer L0. It is some smaller value, which is dependent on the speed and therefore the Lorentz factor. So the train is squashed in that left-right direction. And then if we imagine just switching and getting on the train and say that that's now our reference frame, well, this is where it starts to get a bit weird. If we're the person on the train, then remember, all inertial reference frames are equivalent, and so rather than saying you're going to the right as someone on the train, you would really say that the platform's going to the left. And it's going to the left with the same speed that we said the train was going to the right up here. So we're in the train's reference frame now, and now the person on the train, they of course measure that the length of their train hasn't changed. It's still L0. But they would say that the length of the platform, it's been squashed. So you might be starting to see there's a bit of a paradox here. They're both saying the other one is now shorter, which doesn't really make any sense. But just to really drive home why this doesn't make sense, at least to begin with, I'm just going to slightly change the situation here. In essence, it's the same, but slightly change the situation. So I've still got this train, and let's say that instead of a platform, we're talking about a tunnel. So I've just set up my tunnel there, which is the red lines. I'm not great at drawing things in 2D, but hopefully you can get the hang of what I'm trying to show there. So I'm just going to copy this train down here. Okay, there's the train, and as you can see, it nicely fits in the tunnel. So there's a little bit of spare room on either side here for our tunnel. And I should say, sorry, this is, at the moment, this is not the case. So this is, again, we're imagining that we have the same reference frame, so I really need to get rid of this as well for now, except I don't know how. I need my astrologer friend to help me with this. There we go. So same reference frame. So we've returned to how we were like up here, same reference frame. And so when they have the same reference frame, the train is basically just a tiny bit smaller than the tunnel. Now, if we reintroduce the idea that the train is moving to the right, so I'll draw that in again in green. Okay, it's now moving to the right with a speed that is approaching the speed of light. So it's a big value, which means, like we saw before, everything is going to contract. So the train is now significantly smaller. I'm just going to get rid of these things which are sort of in the way. The train will still have wheels, which is handy for everybody. But to make this accurate, the wheels should be contracted as well in the direction of the motion. So they'll look sort of like that, and so we can see that clearly our train fits in the tunnel even more easily now. Again, you can I'm sure see where I'm going here, that if we flip the tables here and make our reference frame the train's reference frame, then the person on the train will say, actually, it's the tunnel that's now shorter. So I'm not going to bother drawing that just at the moment, because you can see where I'm going with that, but I'll just change the reference frame here to be the tunnel's reference frame. So at this stage there's nothing really different about this compared with the situation I had up here. But just to drive home why this is different, let's imagine that we've got two cheeky maintenance men working on the tunnel, and they decide that as soon as the train enters the tunnel, because they have so much space in here to fit the train in, because it's so length contracted, it fits pretty much 3 times in, they say, well, hey, why don't we just sort of lock the train in? So as soon as the train goes in, let's just for gags, let's just put up a barrier at either end. So as soon as it goes in, they put this barrier in at both ends. That's not working for me, so I'm just going to redraw it. Okay, there we go. And so they just lock the train in, and then of course they're they're not such gangsters that they actually want to cause all this destruction and damage and injury and so on. So they just put it up momentarily, and then they take them both away. So there's sort of a a maintenance man here. I was doing this. Oh man, my mouse drawing skills are really coming to the fore here. So there's this maintenance man and this maintenance man, and they agree that as soon as the train goes in, they're both just going to pop these two walls up at the same time, just for fun, to lock it in for a sec, and then they'll take it back down straight away. So no harm done, because it fits in so easily, or at least no harm done from their point of view, from their reference frame. But where we might start to see a problem is, as you know, if we flip the reference frame, then, sorry, as I say, I'm still getting the hang of this. If we flip the reference frame, we know that, I'm going to do this very crudely, but we know that the train's going to get bigger and the tunnel's going to get smaller, like this, and like this, and therefore the barriers that these jokesters put up are, at least we should imagine, are going to well and truly not contain the train, and it's going to cause the train to have a crash and everybody in it to be severely injured, and then these two guys are going to have some serious explaining to do in a federal court. But it's one or the other. It can't be both. This is where the paradox comes in. We can't have these two situations happening. Either all these people are injured in the train or they're not. Either the train gets derailed and all this damage, or not. So that's our first paradox. Which is it? And I'm not going to answer that. I'm just going to move on to the next paradox and give you some time to think about it. So, our next paradox is the twin paradox. So I've kind of got these arrows here from when I was playing around with it, trying to get the hang of OneNote. I'm sorry, that's very unprofessional of me. So the twin paradox is a very similar idea, but it focuses more on time, and it's probably a little better known. But we've got these two twins. By definition of twins, it means that they were born at the same time, so they're equally old. But then one of these twins, in the sake of scientific experiment, says that she will get on a spaceship and fly away. So, good for her. So let's just draw that in. So she goes flying off with some velocity relative to this person, relative to this twin. And so, as you will remember from, wow, I don't know what I just did there. As you will remember from our time dilation episode or lesson, the person here on Earth, so we're basically in her reference frame at the moment, because we're saying the spaceship is moving relative to the Earth. From her point of view, she says that this clock is ticking slower, and in other words, time is passing at a slower rate here. And therefore, this twin is no longer the same age as the one on Earth. This twin will be younger, because time is passing slower. But again, you can probably imagine where I'm going with this. I can easily just put the V over here, and I can carry this over here and say, well, from the reference frame of the spaceship, she says, no, it's Earth that's moving to the left with a certain velocity, and therefore this clock is ticking slower, therefore she is going to be younger. But again, we can't have it both ways. I mean, if this person comes back to Earth and they actually compare one another, then who's going to be younger? So, let's just say that she does that. She goes all this way, and then, again, in the sake of science, she turns around, comes back, lands on Earth, and they compare who's got more grey hairs. One of them must be older than the other, or perhaps the same age. But the point being that they can't have we can't have Earth twin older than space twin, and space twin older than Earth twin. That won't make sense. So again, you can see we've got a paradox there. We've got an apparent contradiction between these two statements, which special relativity talks about. So I'm going to leave it there. I'll come back to explain these things another time. when I can be bothered. In the meantime, as you can see, my drawing skills with a mouse are truly shocking if you look at these two maintenance men. So of course, if you loved the podcast, feel free to support it, and one day I might be able to afford something to draw with a sort of a digital pen. Something to look forward to, eh? We've all got goals to aspire to.